The German Shepherd wouldn't stop barking. For 3 hours straight, Colonel James Mitchell's dog, Rex, had been standing at the edge of the old Miller property, barking at something in the overgrown garden behind the abandoned greenhouse. It was October 1976, 2 years and 3 months since Sarah Coleman had vanished on her wedding day, and Rex had found something that would finally answer the question that had haunted Brooklyn for 26 months. What happened to the bride who disappeared? My name is Detective Frank Sullivan, and I was the lead investigator on the Coleman case. What I'm about to tell you is the true account of one of the most bizarre disappearances in New York history, and how a war veteran's loyal dog solved a mystery that had stumped the entire NYPD. This is a story about obsession, secrets, and the unbreakable bond between a soldier and his dog. And it begins on a perfect June morning in 1974, when Sarah Coleman put on her wedding dress and walked out of her parents' house, never to be seen again. June 15, 1974. Brooklyn, New York. The Coleman family lived in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street, a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, where kids played stickball in the streets and neighbors left their doors unlocked. Sarah Coleman was 23 years old, beautiful, with long auburn hair and green eyes that her fiancé, Michael Warren, said reminded him of emeralds. She was marrying her high school sweetheart at St. Patrick's Cathedral at 2 o'clock that afternoon. 200 guests were expected. The reception was planned at the Plaza Hotel. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. At 11:30 that morning, Sarah's mother, Dorothy Coleman, saw her daughter for the last time. Sarah was in her childhood bedroom, wearing her wedding dress, a stunning ivory gown with lace sleeves that had cost her father 3 months' salary. She was putting on her veil when Dorothy knocked on the door. "Sweetheart, the car will be here in an hour. Are you ready?" Sarah turned, smiled that radiant smile, and said, "I'm ready, Mom. I'm finally ready." Dorothy went downstairs to help with the final preparations. 30 minutes later, when Sarah's maid of honor went upstairs to check on her, the room was empty. The window was open, the veil was on the floor, and Sarah Coleman was gone. The first thought was that she'd gotten cold feet, that she'd panicked and run. But Sarah's purse was still in the room. Her shoes were still there. Her car was still in the driveway. And most tellingly, her engagement ring, a family heirloom worth over $5,000, was still on the dresser. No runaway bride leaves behind everything she owns, including a ring that valuable. Something was wrong, very wrong. By 2 o'clock, when Sarah hadn't appeared at the church, the family called the police. By 3 o'clock, every cop in Brooklyn was looking for her. By nightfall, the FBI was involved. And by the next morning, when Sarah still hadn't been found, we knew we were dealing with something darker than a case of cold feet. We were dealing with a disappearance, possibly a kidnapping, possibly worse. I was 35 years old then, a detective with the NYPD for 8 years. I'd seen a lot, murders, robberies, domestic violence cases that made your stomach turn. But the Coleman case was different. There was no body, no ransom note, no witnesses, no evidence of a struggle. Sarah Coleman had simply vanished from a locked bedroom in broad daylight, like something out of a magic trick. And for 2 years, despite hundreds of interviews, dozens of searches, and countless dead-end leads, we found nothing. The case went cold. The file gathered dust. The family's hope faded, until Rex started barking. To understand how we got to that October day in 1976, I need to take you back to the investigation. Back to the beginning, when hope was still alive and we believed we could find Sarah Coleman and bring her home safely. The first suspect was obvious, the groom. Michael Warren, 25 years old, worked as an accountant at a firm in Manhattan, came from a good family, no criminal record. But statistics don't lie. In cases of missing women, the husband or boyfriend is guilty 70% of the time. We brought Michael in for questioning 6 times in the first week. His alibi was solid. He was at his parents' house in Queens the entire morning, getting ready with his groomsmen. 15 witnesses confirmed it, but we pushed him anyway, looking for cracks in his story, waiting for him to slip up. He never did. Michael Warren was either innocent or the best liar I'd ever met. We expanded our search. Interviewed every guest on the wedding list. Talked to Sarah's co-workers at the bookstore where she worked. Questioned her friends from college. Everyone said the same thing. Sarah was happy, excited about the wedding, deeply in love with Michael. There were no signs of trouble, no hints of someone who wanted to harm her, no indication she was planning to run away. We checked her bank account, no large withdrawals. We checked bus and train stations. No one matching her description had bought a ticket. We showed her photo at every airport, every taxi company, every hotel within 100 miles. Nothing. The media frenzy was intense. The vanishing bride became front-page news. Sarah's face was on every television screen, every newspaper. Tips poured in, hundreds of them. People claimed to have seen her in California, in Florida, in Canada. Every lead was investigated. Every single one turned out to be false. The public's fascination with the case was both a blessing and a curse. It kept Sarah's story alive, but it also generated so much noise that it was hard to separate real information from the fantasies of attention seekers. 3 months into the investigation, we got what we thought was our big break. A witness came forward, Mrs. Helen Kowalski, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down from the Colemans. She claimed she'd seen a dark blue sedan parked outside the Coleman house on the morning of the wedding. A man had been sitting in the driver's seat, watching the house. She couldn't see his face, but she remembered thinking it was odd. Why would someone just sit there watching? We chased that lead for weeks. Checked every dark blue sedan registered in Brooklyn. Interviewed dozens of owners. It led nowhere. 6 months in, the FBI's profile suggested we might be looking at a serial offender. There had been 2 other disappearances of young women in the New York area in the past year, both unsolved. But the patterns didn't match. The other victims were lower income, had substance abuse issues, disappeared from high-risk areas. Sarah was different. She came from a stable family, had no dangerous habits, disappeared from her own bedroom. The cases weren't connected. By the 1-year mark, the case was effectively cold. We'd exhausted every lead, interviewed over 300 people, searched hundreds of locations. The media had moved on to other stories. The public's attention had shifted, and the Coleman family was left with nothing but questions and grief. Dorothy Coleman aged 10 years in those 12 months. Her husband, Robert, threw himself into work, barely speaking. Michael Warren left New York entirely, unable to bear the memories. Sarah's younger sister, Jennifer, dropped out of college and fell into depression. I couldn't let it go. Something about the case haunted me. The open window, the veil on the floor, the ring left behind. It felt staged, like someone had wanted us to think Sarah had climbed out the window. But the window was 12 feet off the ground, with no ladder, no tree close enough to climb. No one could have gone out that window without breaking their neck. So if Sarah didn't go through the window, how did she leave the room? And more importantly, why? I spent my off hours going through the case file, reviewing every interview, every piece of evidence. I drove past the Coleman house at least once a week, studying the neighborhood, trying to see something I'd missed. My wife thought I was obsessed. She was right, but I couldn't help it. Somewhere out there, Sarah Coleman was either alive and in danger, or dead and waiting to be found. Either way, her family deserved answers. Then, in September 1976, I got a phone call that would change everything. It was from Colonel James Mitchell, a Vietnam veteran who lived 3 blocks from the Coleman house. I'd interviewed him during the initial investigation. He'd been away on his wedding day, visiting family in Pennsylvania. He had nothing useful to offer then. But now, 2 years later, he had something to tell me. "Detective Sullivan," he said, his voice tense. "I think my dog found something. Something related to the Coleman girl." Colonel Mitchell explained that he'd recently adopted Rex, a German shepherd who'd served as a military working dog in Vietnam. Rex had been trained in search and rescue, explosives detection, and patrol work. He was 6 years old, highly intelligent, and fiercely loyal. The colonel had gotten him through a veterans program that rehomed retired military dogs. For the past month, Rex had been acting strangely whenever they walked past the old Miller property, an abandoned house and overgrown lot that sat between the Coleman house and the Colonel's place. "He keeps pulling toward that property," the Colonel said, barking at something in the back garden. "At first, I thought it was just animals, raccoons or possums, but it's persistent. Every single time we walk past, he does it. And yesterday, he actually broke free from his leash and ran onto the property. I had to go in and get him. He was digging in the garden behind the old greenhouse, barking like crazy. I pulled him away, but Detective, I think you should take a look. Rex was a cadaver dog in Vietnam. If he's that focused on one spot." The Miller property. I knew it well. Old Man Miller had died 3 years ago. The house had been empty ever since, tied up in probate while distant relatives fought over the inheritance. The property was overgrown, the house falling apart, the garden a jungle of weeds and wild growth. We'd searched it during the initial investigation, of course. Standard procedure, check all abandoned properties in the area. But it had been a quick search, just a walkthrough to make sure Sarah wasn't hiding there. We hadn't done a thorough forensic examination. We'd had no reason to. But now, with a trained military dog insisting something was there, we had reason. I assembled a team, got a warrant, and on October 12, 1976, we returned to the Miller property with ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and a forensic team. Rex led us straight to the spot, behind the collapsed greenhouse, in what used to be a flower garden. The cadaver dogs confirmed it. There was something buried there. Something that had been there for a long time. We started digging. 3 feet down, we found fabric. Ivory-colored lace, dirt-stained and decomposed, but unmistakable. It was a wedding dress. Sarah Coleman's wedding dress. And inside it, we found remains. Human remains. After 2 years of searching, of hoping, of wondering, we'd finally found Sarah Coleman. She'd been there the whole time, buried in a garden 50 yards from her parents' house. The scene was carefully excavated. The medical examiner determined that the body had been there for approximately 2 years, consistent with Sarah's disappearance date. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. She'd been struck with a heavy object, possibly a pipe or a piece of wood. Death would have been quick. There were no signs of sexual assault, no defensive wounds. She'd been killed from behind, probably never saw it coming. And then her body had been wrapped in a tarp, carried to the Miller property, and buried in that garden. But who? Who had killed Sarah Coleman? And why? The answer came from an unexpected source, Jennifer Coleman, Sarah's younger sister. When we informed the family that we'd found Sarah's body, Jennifer broke down. Not with the grief we expected, but with something else. Guilt. Overwhelming, crushing guilt. And between sobs, she confessed. "It was an accident," she said, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to kill her. I swear I didn't mean to." The story came out slowly, painfully. Jennifer had been jealous of her older sister for years. Sarah was the golden child, beautiful, smart, engaged to a wonderful man. Jennifer was the troubled one, struggled in school, couldn't keep a job, couldn't maintain relationships. On the morning of the wedding, Jennifer had gone to Sarah's room to talk to her. She wanted to tell Sarah that she'd been having an affair with Michael. It had been going on for 6 months. Michael had been coming to Jennifer, complaining about Sarah, saying he was having doubts about the marriage. Jennifer convinced herself that Michael actually loved her, not Sarah. She thought if she told Sarah the truth, Sarah would call off the wedding, and Michael would be free to be with her instead. But when Jennifer confessed, Sarah didn't believe her. She laughed, said Jennifer was making it up out of jealousy. They argued. The argument became heated. Jennifer grabbed a heavy bookend from Sarah's desk, a brass sculpture in the shape of an eagle. She meant to slam it on the desk, to emphasize her point, to make Sarah listen. But Sarah turned at the wrong moment, and the bookend struck her in the back of the head. Sarah collapsed instantly, blood pooling on the floor. She was dead before she hit the ground. Jennifer panicked. She couldn't call for help. She'd be arrested for murder. She couldn't leave Sarah there. The wedding was in 2 hours, someone would find her soon. So she made a terrible decision. She dragged Sarah's body to the window, opened it to make it look like Sarah had climbed out. Then she left the room, went downstairs, and when no one was looking, she slipped out the back door. She dragged Sarah's body, wrapped in a bedsheet, across the backyard, through the hedge, onto the Miller property. The garden was overgrown, hidden from view. She dug a shallow grave using a garden spade she found in the collapsed greenhouse. It took her 90 minutes. She buried her sister, covered the grave with fallen leaves and debris, and walked back home. By the time Sarah's maid of honor went upstairs and discovered she was missing, Jennifer was back in the house, acting shocked and concerned like everyone else. For 2 years, Jennifer lived with what she'd done. The guilt ate at her constantly. She started drinking heavily, taking pills to sleep, avoiding her family because she couldn't bear to see their grief. When we found Sarah's body, Jennifer said it was almost a relief. She could finally stop lying, finally stop pretending. But there was one part of the story that didn't make sense. The affair with Michael. We brought him back to New York for questioning. He was devastated by the news of Sarah's death, but when we asked about Jennifer's claim, he was genuinely confused. Affair? What affair? I barely spoke to Jennifer. She came to a few family dinners, but we never had any kind of relationship. Certainly not an affair. We dug deeper. Checked Michael's phone records, his credit card statements, his schedule. There was no evidence of any contact between him and Jennifer beyond normal family interactions. Jennifer had made it up. The entire affair was a fantasy she'd created in her mind. She'd convinced herself that Michael's polite conversations with her meant something more, that his complaints about wedding stress meant he wanted out of the marriage. She'd built an entire false reality, and when she tried to share it with Sarah, and Sarah rejected it, Jennifer snapped. It wasn't premeditated murder. It was a crime of passion born from delusion and jealousy. But Sarah Coleman was still dead, and Jennifer Coleman would spend the next 20 years in prison for manslaughter. The case was closed. The Coleman family finally had answers, though those answers brought no comfort. Dorothy Coleman never spoke to Jennifer again. Robert Coleman died of a heart attack 6 months later, the stress and grief too much to bear. Michael Warren attended Sarah's funeral, said goodbye to the woman he'd planned to spend his life with, and moved to California. He never married, and Colonel James Mitchell's German Shepherd, Rex, became a minor celebrity. The dog who solved the mystery that stumped the NYPD. The Colonel was offered money for interviews, for Rex's story to be made into a book. He declined all of it. Rex was just doing what he was trained to do, he said. Find the missing. Bring them home. The aftermath of the Coleman case stayed with me for years. Hell, it stays with me still. I'm retired now, 70 years old, living in a quiet neighborhood in upstate New York. But I still think about that case. About the bride who vanished. About the sister who killed her out of jealous delusion. About the family destroyed by one terrible moment. I kept in touch with Colonel Mitchell for several years after the case closed. We'd meet for coffee occasionally, and he'd bring Rex. That dog was something special. Smart, loyal, and with an uncanny ability to sense things humans couldn't. The Colonel told me that after finding Sarah's grave, Rex changed. He became calmer, more settled, like he'd completed a mission. Military working dogs are trained to have purpose, to complete tasks. Finding Sarah had given Rex closure in a way that probably sounds crazy to people who don't understand the bond between a soldier and his dog. The Colonel passed away in 1983, and Rex went to live with the Colonel's daughter in New Jersey. I heard Rex lived to be 14, a good long life for a German Shepherd. When he died, the Colonel's daughter called to tell me. She said that until his last day, whenever they drove past a cemetery or an old property, Rex would perk up, alert, like he was still searching. Still trying to bring the missing home. Once a search and rescue dog, always a search and rescue dog. The legal proceedings against Jennifer Coleman were painful to watch. Her lawyer tried to argue temporary insanity, claimed she'd had a psychotic break. But the evidence was clear. After killing Sarah, Jennifer had been rational enough to hide the body, stage the scene, and maintain the lie for 2 years. That's not insanity. That's consciousness of guilt. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict her of voluntary manslaughter. She was sentenced to 20 years. She served 18 before being paroled in 1994. I attended some of the trial, watched Jennifer on the stand crying, explaining how the jealousy had consumed her, how she'd created this fantasy relationship with Michael, how everything had spiraled out of control. Part of me felt sorry for her. She was clearly disturbed, clearly needed psychiatric help. But another part of me, the bigger part, thought about Sarah, about a young woman who died on what should have been the happiest day of her life, about parents who spent 2 years wondering what happened to their daughter, about a groom who waited at the altar for a bride who would never come. Some people asked me why it took 2 years to find Sarah when she was buried so close to home. The answer is simple and frustrating. We had no reason to thoroughly search the Miller property initially. Sarah disappeared from inside her house. All evidence suggested she was taken by someone. We searched abandoned buildings looking for places where she might be held captive. We didn't think to treat her own neighborhood as a crime scene because we didn't know a crime had been committed there. It's easy to say in hindsight that we should have searched more carefully. But with limited resources and hundreds of possible locations, you have to prioritize. We made the best decisions we could with the information we had. What changed everything was Rex. That dog's training, his instincts, his persistence, that's what broke the case. Without him, Sarah might still be buried in that garden. The property could have been sold, developed, and Sarah's remains destroyed or lost forever. Rex gave the Coleman family closure. He gave Sarah a proper burial. He gave us the truth. The case taught me something about the nature of evil. We always think of murderers as monsters, as people fundamentally different from us. But Jennifer Coleman wasn't a monster. She was a troubled young woman who made a terrible decision in a moment of rage. She spent 2 years living with the consequences, watching her family suffer, knowing she was responsible. That's a special kind of hell. Did she deserve punishment? Absolutely. Did she deserve forgiveness? That's not for me to say. Dorothy Coleman never forgave her. She died in 1999, and in her obituary, only one daughter was mentioned, Sarah. I think about alternative scenarios sometimes. What if Jennifer had called for help immediately? What if she'd admitted it was an accident? Sarah would still be dead, but Jennifer might have been charged with a lesser crime. Involuntary manslaughter, maybe even self-defense if she'd claimed Sarah attacked her first. The Coleman family would have had their answers immediately instead of suffering through 2 years of uncertainty. But Jennifer panicked, and that panic led to cover-up, which led to the prolonged agony of everyone involved. The Miller property was eventually sold in 1978. The new owners tore down the old house and built a modern home. They knew about the history, about Sarah's body being found there, but they weren't superstitious. Tragic things happen everywhere. The wife told me when I ran into her at the grocery store once. We can't let the past stop us from living. I respected that attitude. The property wasn't evil. The garden wasn't cursed. It was just a place where something terrible happened, like countless other places in this city. Michael Warren eventually did marry, I heard. In 1985, he married a woman he met in California. They had 2 children. I'm glad he found happiness. He deserved it. He'd lost his fiancée, been suspected of her murder, spent 2 years under public scrutiny, and then had to relive the trauma when her body was finally found. The fact that he could move forward, build a life, find love again, that takes remarkable strength. As for Rex, he became something of a legend among military working dog handlers. His story was used in training programs as an example of how retired military dogs can continue to serve in civilian life. Several police departments started programs to adopt retired military working dogs specifically for cold case investigations. If a dog trained in cadaver detection or search and rescue can help solve even one case, they've justified their entire existence. I retired from the NYPD in 1991 after 33 years of service. The Coleman case was far from the only case I worked, but it was the one that stayed with me most. Maybe because it took so long to solve. Maybe because the solution was so tragic, not a stranger danger scenario. but a family torn apart from within. Or maybe because it showed me that answers, when they finally come, don't always bring the peace we expect. Sometimes they just replace one kind of pain with another. Dorothy Coleman once said to me, near the end of the trial, "I spent 2 years hoping Sarah was alive somewhere. Part of me still wishes I could keep hoping. At least hope doesn't have to face the reality that my daughter killed my daughter." That statement haunted me. She was right. Sometimes not knowing is easier than knowing. But the family deserved the truth, no matter how painful. There's a small memorial bench in Prospect Park now, dedicated to Sarah Coleman. It sits near the Rose Garden, overlooking the lake. The plaque reads, "Sarah and Coleman, 1951 to 1974. Beloved daughter, forever young, forever remembered. On the anniversary of her death each year, someone, I don't know who, leaves fresh roses on that bench. Red roses, Sarah's favorite. Maybe it's Michael. Maybe it's an old friend. Maybe it's just a stranger who read about the case and felt moved by it. Whoever it is, it's nice to know Sarah isn't forgotten. As for me, I learned to make peace with the case. I did my job. I followed the leads. And when the break came, thanks to a loyal German shepherd and his devoted owner, I made sure justice was served. That's all any detective can do. We can't bring back the dead. We can't undo tragedies. But we can find the truth. And sometimes, the truth is all we have to offer the living. I still have the case file, stored in a box in my garage. Every few years, I take it out and go through it, remembering the witness statements, the search logs, the photos of Sarah in her wedding dress, smiling, unaware that she had less than an hour to live. And I think about Rex, that remarkable dog who succeeded where an entire police department had failed. In a way, he was the real hero of this story. He found Sarah. He brought her home. He gave her family the closure they desperately needed. And isn't that what we all want in the end? To be found, to be remembered, to be brought home. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of the incredible bond between humans and their loyal dogs, please like this video and subscribe to Paws of History. We share true stories about remarkable animals who changed lives, solved mysteries, and showed us what loyalty really means. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our stories. And tell us in the comments, have you ever had a dog that seemed to sense things humans couldn't? Share your stories below. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most extraordinary heroes walk on 4 legs.